Hello and welcome to the CBV podcast.
Hello and welcome, my name is Cloud and today I'm going to be sharing with you my thoughts on the movie Space Jam: A New Legacy. So this is a sequel to the original Space Jam. It came out I think 25 years ago, but you know it's a sequel that kind of stands on its own. It doesn't rely on your knowledge or memory of the first movie to understand what's going on in this one. It's still a very basic premise in the sense that it's, you know, getting a basketball player to play basketball with the Looney Tunes. So it's still got that basic concept, but they just do a few different things that are different to the first movie. That's not to say that they don't acknowledge the first movie at all. They have a few little moments where, you know, they might reference very quickly or make a quick joke to the first film, so it does acknowledge that the first film exists in this world. It's not like a reboot or anything, but it's not really a continuation either. It's just two movies that are set in the same world, but you know, they're just kind of like, okay, we've had this adventure, now let's go to this adventure in the sequel, which I quite like. I like the fact that it doesn't rely on the first movie to work. Like, if anything, they could have taken those jokes and references out of the movie and you wouldn't really have questioned it. You could kind of just assume they were still in the same world, but it was nice that they gave like a little wink and nod to the first film. So the story for this sequel, we start off with our basketball player for this one is LeBron James. It's not Michael Jordan like in the first film. And so LeBron James, he starts off the film having kind of a family issues, particularly with his son. He's not really being the best father at the beginning of the movie. And you know, he's trying to get his son to play basketball like him, but you know, his son likes basketball, but he's not really as passionate about basketball as him, and so they're kind of butting heads on that particular aspect of their relationship. And so, you know, they end up at Warner Brothers because Warner Brothers contacts LeBron James and they want to pitch him an idea. And, you know, things continue on, and eventually LeBron and his son find themselves sort of kidnapped and trapped into the Warner Brothers serververse, which is, you know, where the Warner Brothers servers store all of the Warner Brothers movies and properties, and they're all kept in this serververse. And while they're in the serververse, they come across the villain of the movie called Algae Rhythm, who is played by Don Cheadle. He's literally the algorithm to the Warner Brothers studios. He comes up with all the ideas and pitches for the next big movie they should make. So he's kind of the brains behind all the movies they've made in the past and the brains behind the success of the studio. And basically, because of this, he's annoyed that, you know, Warner Brothers get all the success and credit, but he's not being acknowledged as the genius behind their success because he's just an algorithm. So he literally kidnaps LeBron to challenge him to a basketball game. He's like, hey, I want everyone to watch us playing basketball. I want all your fans and as many people as I can get to see me and you together. I want people to realize that I am the genius behind Warner Brothers. I want to get the credit that I deserve. And so, you know, he's like, I'll challenge you to a game of basketball, and if you win, you can leave the serververse with your son. So then he sends LeBron to Looney Tunes World, and LeBron has to gather up the Looney Tunes and recruit them to play basketball with him in the hopes that him and his son will leave the serververse. So that's the basic concept. But they have a few little different spins on it, which I'll get into later. First of all, I want to talk about the characters. So first of all, we have LeBron James and his family. Let's start off with LeBron. I think, you know, I was kind of expecting, I guess, the role of the basketball player to be, you know, pretty similar to the Michael Jordan character in the first one. But they actually give him more to do in this one. For example, you know, he has more lines in the film. He has more screen time in this one. He actually has an arc in the film. I don't really remember Michael Jordan having an arc in the first Space Jam movie. You know, I'm trying to think, like in the beginning of the first Space Jam, he retires from basketball, goes on to play baseball and finds, I guess, that he's not very good at it. And then literally from there just kind of gets pulled into the Looney Tunes world, which apparently in the first one, the Looney Tunes world is literally kind of in the center of the earth. Like, they don't really explain it, not that they need to, but it's just interesting how In the first one, the cartoon world is literally just under the earth, and then in this one, the Looney Tunes world is now in the serververse. So just to say right now, I kind of prefer the fact that the Looney Tunes world and how it all works is kind of a bit more logical in the sequel. When I say logical, take it with a grain of salt, because it's still a really ridiculous movie, but it's slightly more logical than the first one. So I did like that the Looney Tunes are found in the Warner Brothers servers. And LeBron James is given more to do basically overall. And because of that, I've heard people saying that he is a bad actor in the movie. He's not nearly as good as Michael Jordan in the first one. And, he just gave a bad performance. And I agree and disagree. I think technically he gave a worse performance than Michael Jordan, but I think there's reasons behind that to back it up and explain why that's the case. But I don't think that Michael Jordan is a better actor than LeBron. I mean, I think I saw a clip of him in the movie called Trainwrecked, and he was miles better as an actor in that than he was in Space Jam. But my thoughts in it are Michael Jordan and LeBron's character are treated completely differently in the Space Jam movies. In the first one, Michael Jordan is kind of the straight man. He just kind of takes everything very seriously, even to the point that when he's dragged into the Looney Tunes world, he's not really baffled by what's going on. He kind of just accepts it and moves on. Which, I think the filmmakers in the first one, they realized, hey, look, this guy can't act, so maybe we should give him as little lines as we can, just give him some very basic things to do, and that'll just keep the movie going. But in the sequel, they kind of embrace the fact that, LeBron is going to have awkward acting moments in the movie, because even though Michael Jordan technically gave a better performance, he still had awkward moments in the first movie as well, and I think they knew that was going to happen no matter what basketball player they brought onto the movie. So hey, let's just embrace it in the sequel. Let's just let LeBron have these cheesy acting moments, and I personally like that. I think seeing the awkward chemistry between these basketball players and the Looney Tunes is part of the charm of these movies. And I think by trying to avoid it as much as possible, you're kind of denying what makes the movies kind of so unique, is this unusual quality to them. So, they kind of play it differently. LeBron is not playing the straight man. He is literally kind of given the opportunity to overact to certain situations. And that got a chuckle out of me. I'm not going to lie. It made me laugh a few times. And it was nice to just see them kind of embrace how kind of silly the whole concept is anyway. And this movie is very meta. It acknowledges how silly the idea is from the get-go. So it definitely knows what kind of movie it's trying to be. So I think LeBron, he's not a great actor, but I think it's unfair to compare him to Michael Jordan, because those characters were played completely differently as far as the basketball character type is concerned. But I thought LeBron was, he put a smile on my face, and that's really all you need to do in these movies as the basketball character. LeBron's family, the cast that plays his fictional family, they're really good. I think the wife is probably the best out of her and the two sons. The older son's really great, and the younger son is fine as well. My only issue is that the younger son becomes a big part of the movie, which you kind of need, because you sort of need it and you sort of don't. I think they use the younger son too much, and as a result, I kind of got bored of watching him on screen, whereas the rest of the family, they're used for very small sections across the movie, and so therefore I found them more entertaining. But because we're stuck with the younger son a lot longer than the rest of the family, I kind of got bored of his performance. And it wasn't that he was a bad actor, it's just he doesn't have any funny lines. There's just nothing really interesting about his character at all. He's literally just a kid who likes making video games, and that's just kind of his thing. He just likes making video games, and there wasn't really much to his character. He didn't have a great relationship with his dad, LeBron, and he just wants his dad to get him. It was fine, but I was like, we could have cut his scenes out a lot more. But as far as them acting goes, I thought they were all fine. They all did a decent job. Now we go into Looney Tunes. I thought they were, they're exactly what you expect them to be. They're loony, they're fun, they're quirky. They'll give you the chuckles and laughs here and there, so they do the job that they need to do. The one thing I would say about the Looney Tunes is that there's one character that they just didn't need in the movie at all. Like, if you cut him out of the movie, or like cut him out of the script, it would have affected nothing. And that character is, I think his name's Speedy Gonzales. He's the super fast mouse. They recruit him. They find him along with the other Looney Tunes members. They recruit him. But then I don't think he ever plays basketball. Like, he doesn't actually contribute anything to the movie. If you guys could correct me in the comments, because let me know, because like I can't remember him ever playing basketball. And so I was kind of thinking to myself, like, did they cut things out of the movie? Was the movie initially longer? Because you recruit Speedy Gonzales, and I don't remember him having one thing to do in the basketball game. Like, they have two basketball games. They have one where they're just sort of training and practicing, and they're all showing off in that sequence. And I don't remember him doing anything in there. And then they have the big final basketball game right at the end of the movie, and I still don't remember him doing anything. So he's just a character that was wasted. He should have just been cut out of the movie completely, and it wouldn't have made any difference whatsoever. As far as the screen time goes for each individual Looney Tunes, I think they focus more on certain characters in this one more than they do in the first movie. I think in the first movie, everyone gets a fairly good amount of time to shine and get really good highlights in there. In this one, it's a lot more focused on more specific characters, and then other characters kind of fade into the background as the movie keeps going. That's just my opinion. That's just what my thoughts were when I was watching it. And actually, I'm pretty sure they must have cut scenes out of it, because after they play, some basketball, we cut to them in the locker room at one point in the movie, and they're all like really injured. Like, like Daffy Duck's got his beak on backwards. People have got, their tails on fire. You've got people with like bruises or whatever. And that seemed a bit jarring, because I was looking at certain characters who were injured, but I hadn't seen them play basketball in the scene before that. So like, they must have cut stuff out of this movie. So maybe Speedy Gonzales did have a bigger role, but they just cut it out of the movie. I'm not sure. There was just little continuity issues. I was like, wait, I don't remember you guys playing basketball yet. So how are you guys all injured? Like, it was just a little thing that caught my eye. But yeah, the Looney Tunes as a whole, they're all good. Whenever they are on screen, they're all awesome. There's never a character overused. They're all entertaining anytime they get to show up on screen. I will say that there was a bonus to this movie that I appreciated. Not only has LeBron kind of got a character arc, and that's kind of a theme throughout the movie, but Bugs Bunny also has sort of a little story across the movie. Nothing deep or anything. It's quite basic, but it's a lot more than they gave him in the first movie. He was literally just there to be Bugs Bunny in the first one. In this one, he's kind of having a family crisis as far as his relationship with the Looney Tunes go. And I thought that was an interesting dynamic I hadn't seen, or it was, I hadn't ever seen that situation remotely referenced in any Looney Tunes movies or shows I'd ever watched. So I thought that was very interesting, and I think they could have gone into it more, but because we had to give screen time to LeBron and his son having this, trying to develop their father and son relationship, it kind of took time away from Bugs Bunny's family crisis. And I actually kind of wish we gave more time to Bugs Bunny's family crisis, because that was just more interesting, and it's something I haven't seen before from the Looney Tunes. So, I think they could have switched a few things around as far as how much time certain aspects of the story was given. But yeah, they're all great. Bugs Bunny gets, a cool story in it. Speedy Gonzales was wasted, should have been cut out of the movie. Now I want to talk about the villain of the movie, Algae Rhythm, played by Don Cheadle. He was great in this movie. I'm only really familiar with his work in the Marvel Cinematic Universe as War Machine. I know he's been in a lot of good movies, and he's done great performances. I've only seen clips of those, but I've never actually fully watched any of his work outside of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I just hadn't seen him do a performance like this before, and it was just over the top, wacky, and comedic, and he's got good comedic timing. I wouldn't say he's not like Jim Carrey. I think that was kind of an element he was sort of going for, but he knew that, like, not to go too far because he isn't Jim Carrey. So I think he gave a nice balance of the goofy humor in his performance. And he was just a better villain than the head alien in the first Space Jam movie. Because in the first Space Jam, the villain, the alien boss in that one, he kind of just fades into the background. Like, the Monstars are really more focused villains in that movie. And in this one, Algae actually is the villain, and they give time to him, and he's got a lot of screen time. So, yeah, he's definitely, I think, a better villain than the one in the first movie. And he just made me laugh. He actually, near the end of the movie, I'll talk about it later in my spoiler section of the review, he had this one moment, and it was just so, I wasn't expecting it whatsoever, and just the way he gets angry, it just made me laugh so much, just from this one specific moment. I thought it was great. But yeah, Don Cheadle did a really good job in this performance. Can't fault it whatsoever. Then let's move on to the villain basketball team. So in the first movie, we had the Monstars, which were these cartoon aliens who get the abilities of basketball players. In this one, you've got the Goon Squad, and I really enjoyed seeing them, but they don't really have any character in this movie whatsoever, and they're not really supposed to, because they're literally created by Algae Rhythm to be his basketball team. They're not characters that existed at the beginning of the film or ever existed in this world. They're literally characters that were created to play his basketball game. So I thought that was an interesting difference. As I said before, the Monstars were much more focused villains in the first one than their actual villainous boss. Whereas in this one, Don Cheadle is the villain of the film, and his basketball team literally just come in at the end of the movie in the final basketball game just to play basketball. So I thought that was probably, it wasn't better or worse. I think it was just nice to know that the villain, the actual villain of the movie, had a much bigger presence than in the one in the first film. But I did love watching the Monstars in the first movie. They did have a lot of character and stuff. But what separates them as far as two villain teams is that the Monstars didn't really have any abilities. They were just kind of aliens that sucked the skills of us basketball players out of them and literally just turned into alien basketball players. They were just basically really tall and super strong. But they didn't really have any unique ways of playing basketball as individual team members. Whereas in this one, they really take advantage of that difference. And the Goon Squad, they all have their own designs and abilities, which made it really much more visually interesting to watch them play basketball. For example, you've got one team member who's a snake, you've got one who's a spider, you've got one who can fly around like a bird, and you've got one who has the powers of water and fire. And you've got one who basically can, control. He's a robot, basically. So that was nice. It was just nice to see them change up the team in that way. They don't all look similar. They don't all have the same powers. They're literally all their own unique basketball players with their own unique style of playing basketball. So, points to that. But they're not actually characters. They're just literally there to play basketball, which is fine because the movie acknowledges it. It's not like they wrote them into the movie and they were supposed to have character but didn't. They literally are created in the movie just to play basketball. So I thought that was good. That's all I really have to say about the characters. Let's just move on to the visuals, because in the first movie the Looney Tunes were all classic 2D animation, and they look good. Interacting with Michael Jordan, they're very charming to watch. But in this movie, they try and, give you something else that's different to the first movie. So not only are they classic 2D animation, but they're also at some point 3D CGI animation for the final basketball game. And I thought that was cool, because it does something different to the characters. It gives you something different that you haven't seen in the franchise. But also it gives a nice balance in hey, if you don't like the 3D CGI animation, you still got the classic 2D animation that we're going to have in this movie. And if you're, kind of tired of seeing them as cartoons and would like to see them do this new, 3D CGI animation that they've been doing, well, not Warner Brothers, but movies in general have been doing with cartoon characters. You've got Sonic the Hedgehog and Detective Pikachu. They've basically been doing this thing where instead of making these cartoons look like they would exist in the world by giving them realistic eyes and mouths and all that, they're like, no, we'll just take the literally the design of the character from the original source material, and we'll literally just make it 3D and add fur textures to it. That's just the best way to go. And I think Hollywood's kind of learned the hard way, especially after that first Sonic the Hedgehog trailer where they gave him a completely different design to start with. I think they've learned that the best thing to do is keep the designs that people really love and appreciate, and just add textures to them, because it just looks so much better. And that's what they've done here. They've given the Looney Tunes a 3D CGI look. They've kept exactly the same designs they would have if they were 2D, but they've just, given them a 3D model, and they've added textures to them, and I think it looks great. I don't always think they look perfect, but they still look good enough that I'm totally up for seeing them on screen to look like that. It was just a fun, different approach to it, and also I think it was good they did that, because if you watch the first and second movie, the 2D animation styles are different, and maybe that's just me as someone who's got a really good eye for seeing things in movies, but I think technically, the different animation styles, they're drawn slightly differently, they move slightly differently. I think in the first one, the animation was much more appropriate to see them interact with live action people. But in this one, it wouldn't have worked. I think they work as 2D animations. They work best in 2D environments. You'll get a few times where they're in live action settings, especially when they're hopping across Warner Brothers universes in the movie. There's some moments where they work because they're only on screen in those environments for a short period of time. But there was a moment when literally they're getting changed from 2D to 3D characters, and the moment that they're standing with LeBron when he's in live action form as cartoon characters, they just didn't quite move fluently enough for them to look natural in a 3D environment. And so I think it was a good decision to make them CGI characters, because they definitely move and flow better when they're talking and interacting with LeBron James as an actor. So I think that was good. But yeah, as I said, if you don't like the 3D animation, they're still giving you the 2D animation, and they're still using it really effectively in this movie. The Easter eggs. So I can't remember if I've mentioned it already. Sorry, I've just been talking so much that I'm not even sure if I've addressed this. So in the first movie, the Looney Tunes world is for some reason in the center of the earth. Doesn't explain it, doesn't need to, but it's just an interesting decision they made, that Michael Jordan in the first one was just dragged into the center of the earth and he lands in the Looney Tunes world. But in this one, the Looney Tunes world is in the Serververse, where all the Warner Brothers movies are, and so as a result, the Looney Tunes have the freedom to hop from world to world. So you can hop to Harry Potter world, Matrix world, DC world, and all that. And so, like, as a result, you've got all these Warner Brothers Easter eggs and all these little references and characters that they come across, and it kind of feels like Ready Player One, but in the best way possible, because Ready Player One, on the first time watching it, or even just the first time watching the Ready One Player trailer, it's really exciting, because you're getting to see all these characters from all these movies on screen in this one movie. But they just look like the characters. In Ready Player One, those characters don't have their own personalities from their own movies. They're people who look like characters from movies. But in this one, because they're in the Serververse, and therefore everything in the Serververse is the movies, the actual movies, all the characters and worlds they come across actually are the characters and the worlds from the movies. So it's a lot more satisfying to see all these cameos, Easter eggs, and references, because they actually are the things from those Warner Brothers properties, which is much more exciting. The one thing I will say, though, is that obviously if they come across any characters that are featured in the movie that they don't directly come across, there are people in the audience in the final basketball game, and you can see in the background, oh, there's Jim Carrey's The Mask, oh, there's Pennywise from It, oh, there's Clockwork Orange, oh, there's characters from Game of Thrones and all that. So you've got all these characters in the background, but they're very obviously not played by the same people who are from those original movies. They haven't got Jim Carrey to play the Mask in the background. They've just got an extra to put on Mask makeup and pretend to be the Mask cheering in the crowd. So it kind of they kind of look more like cosplayers. Like some of the makeup looks really good on some characters. Like I think they've got Danny DeVito's Penguin in the crowd, and the makeup they used for him looked pretty good. Like you could still tell it wasn't obviously Danny DeVito in the makeup, but it still looked pretty good. And then you've got some like Pennywise, and it's quite obvious that's not the Pennywise from the It movies. But, you know, they did a good enough job where it's still charming and still fun to be like, hey, there's Pennywise in the crowd. So, you know, any Easter eggs that are in the background, they're obviously not things from the movie the way that we've seen them before. They're kind of like knockoffs almost, but not in a bad way. That's just the way they had to do it. But when they travel to different worlds, that's really fun to see. And when they come across the Warner Brothers characters, that's just really fun to see as well. I'll talk more about the Easter eggs specifically in the spoiler section of this podcast, but we'll keep moving on. The humor is really good. A lot of the humor, again, it comes from the Easter eggs and the Warner Brothers movie references, and also the humor comes from lines of dialogue that are just so awkward, and I have to assume that they've deliberately written these scenes to come across as awkward. I presume that they're just embracing the charm of how awkward LeBron's performance is going to be with the Looney Tunes, or even just how silly the movie is. So I think the humor comes from the Ready One Player aspect of this movie, as well as how awkward and cheesy and silly the tone of the movie actually is. I think they've just embraced what it is. Sorry, I've got a bunch of notes here, but I'm trying to make sure I only talk about non-spoiler stuff right now. One thing I would say about the Toon Squad playing basketball, the best thing about that is seeing the Toon Squad actually use their kind of abilities, because if you think about it, the Goon Squad, as players who have their own power sets, they're quite appropriate to play opposite the Toon Squad, because they've got their own powers, but the Toon Squad in a way also have their own powers. For example, you've got Roadrunner, who's got super speed. You've got Wile E. Coyote, who's kind of like a very good with explosives. You've got Lola Bunny, who's genuinely the best basketball player on the team, apart from LeBron. And then you've got Granny, who's kind of like a martial artist badass, and they do explain why she's like that in the movie. And, you know, so they've all got their own little qualities and abilities and unique power sets, so it kind of works. It's kind of more interesting to see two teams that have all the members have their own abilities, so that was quite fun to see as well. I think that's kind of all I've got to say non-spoiler wise. I mean, I guess the soundtrack's quite a big thing as well. So the soundtrack is not as memorable as the first one. I think when you come out of this movie, you're not really going to remember any really songs from the soundtrack. Having said that, I did go back and listen to what songs were on the movie that I just didn't memorize. And there's one song called Crowd Go Crazy, and ever since I've listened to that properly, that's just been stuck on my head. So they had one song that did get stuck in my head up there with, you know, the iconic Space Jam theme from the first movie. So it's not on the same level as that, but it did get stuck in my head. So they had one good song choice for me. But, you know, it still worked. All the songs they used still blended well into the movie. It's just that there's nothing iconic that stands out in your head that, you know, is so catchy that you continue, you know, remembering it after the movie. Trying to think. The best part of the movie for me was probably a tie between Bugs Bunny and LeBron James going to all these different Warner Brothers planets and recruiting the Looney Tunes. So they're doing all this movie universe hopping, and that was really fun to watch. And the other thing I really enjoyed was the final basketball game, when we got to see the Looney Tunes play basketball in their loony way that we know from the first movie. And they had some really creative ideas as to how to get these characters to play basketball. I mean, obviously, just like the first movie, there's not actually any rules to this basketball game. It's like, if you can get the ball in the hoop, that's all you need to do. It doesn't matter if you cheat or completely ignore what the rules of basketball normally are. All you have to do is get the ball in the hoop, and that's still what works as a score. So, yeah, it's just really fun. And also, I don't really know anything about basketball, so they didn't need to have actual rules, because in my mind, all I think about is, yeah, just get the ball in the hoop and that'll be good enough. So it just works for me on that level. I've heard some people don't like the fact that when they play basketball in the movies, it's just very illogical and doesn't make any sense. And I think that works, because it just kind of simplifies the game as someone who doesn't know basketball, get rules whatsoever. So that was good. The worst part of the movie, trying to think. I've mentioned Speedy Gonzalez. That's not really the worst part of the movie. That's just something I think didn't need to be there. I guess the worst part of the movie is LeBron's son, just because we spend too much time with him. It's just, he takes up too much screen time, and he's not really the actor for me to have that kind of screen time that I would actually be invested in his character. So I think they should have cut down his screen time from the movie. Actually, I think this movie is a little bit too long. I think they could have cut off like half an hour from this movie, period. I think this movie, because the first one I think is 90 minutes long, and so it's a nice short even time to have everything they wanted to do in the movie happen. But in this one, it goes on a bit too long. Like at the point where they were starting to be able to, in the final basketball match, I think halfway through there, for that basketball match, I started to feel the time a little bit. I'm like, okay, well, this movie's quite long now. But luckily, that was the point in the movie where they just went as loony with the basketball playing as possible, as the Looney Tunes. I'm like, okay, I'm back on board now. So they just about saved the runtime from the fact that when I was starting to feel the time, they went, a bit Looney Tunes wacky and crazy again. I was like, okay, cool, you just about saved it. But definitely this movie probably could have had 30 minutes trimmed off of it. So yeah, that's kind of my non-spoiler thoughts on the film. Would I recommend you see it? Yeah, definitely. Is it better than the first film? It's definitely more entertaining than the first film, and it's definitely slightly more logical than the first film, which is kind of weird to say because it's still bonkers and insane, and it's silly. But they definitely, the world building and the way they explain how the world works definitely makes more sense than the way they explain the original Space Jam. Because the other thing was, what really confused me in the first one was that apparently these aliens aren't from the Looney Tunes world, but yet they're still cartoons. So they're these cartoon aliens that came from space in our real world and came down to our real world Earth, into the center of the Earth, to capture the Looney Tunes in the cartoon world, which is just weird because they're cartoons even when they're not in the Looney Tunes world. So the world building in the first one just kind of doesn't make sense at all. But again, because it's such a silly concept, you kind of ignore it. But in the sequel, they definitely kind of, the world building makes a bit more sense. Yeah, I definitely recommend it. I found it more entertaining than the first one, so I would actually more likely rewatch the sequel than I would the first movie. Am I saying the first movie's bad? No, the first movie's not bad at all. I'd say they're both equally good. It just depends on your taste. Like for me, I think if it's a silly premise anyway, you should go as bonkers as possible, which they do in the sequel. They go as nuts as they possibly can, and so therefore that won me over more than being silly in the first one, but it being not simple, but they could have pushed it further maybe, I suppose. And I guess the sequel made me realise how much further they could have gone in the first one. Not saying that they should have done the Warner Brothers thing with their universe hopping. I just think there was a bit more creativity going on with how they use the Looney Tunes, and that just kind of put a bigger smile on my face. So yeah, definitely go watch Space Jam: A New Legacy. But again, if you don't like the sequel, you still got the first one. That's never going away. So it's just I personally prefer the sequel. Okay, let me move on to my spoiler thoughts. So spoiler warning now. If you don't want to be spoiled at all for this movie, just click off. Don't listen to anything I've got to say. But I'm going to do spoilers now in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so, God, let me just quickly look at my notes so I can get to the spoiler section again. So, the references, the cameos, the world building is some of my favorite aspects of this movie. I think it works really well. They hop to all these different worlds: DC, Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, The Matrix, Mad Max, Casablanca. All really good. My favorite moment where they hop to another universe was probably the Mad Max universe, where they find Wile E. Coyote chasing the Roadrunner, and it was just done so perfectly. I think why it worked so well for me is because when I heard people doing reviews for Mad Max Fury Road, I heard one or two people compare it to the Looney Tunes and Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner, because, you know, Mad Max is basically a gritty adult version of Wile E. Coyote chasing a Roadrunner. It just so happens to be that instead of it being Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner, they're just a bunch of villainous cars chasing Mad Max in his car. So I thought that was genius. Also, the desert setting, it just makes sense because, you know, those Looney Tunes characters, you know, they usually have episodes in that kind of desert environment, and so having them in Mad Max world just made so much sense. Just, I think the pairing was just perfect, and it just kind of made fun of Mad Max for how simplistic Fury Road is, and it is just basically a chase movie, and it just blends well perfectly with the fact that Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner are known to basically just chase each other. So I thought that was such a great way to combine the characters. The movie hopping moment that made me probably laugh the most was the Austin Powers one. You had what was his name? Elmer Fudd, I think. He came out as Mini-Me. That was humorous, but the one thing that caught me off guard was seeing Sylvester Stallone as Dr. Evil's cat, because he was like all shaved, he had no fur on him. It was such a weird way to look at that character, and it just made me laugh so much. The other thing I really enjoyed, which was the highlight of the movie for me, was I forgot to say, the one cameo that shocked me just because I wasn't expecting it whatsoever. It didn't even cross my mind as a possibility, was Rick and Morty showing up to drop off Tasmanian Devil. I didn't even know Rick and Morty were owned by Warner Brothers, so when that happened, I was like mind blown. I was like, oh my god, you've got the most adult cartoons appearing in Space Jam, and you've got the voice actors to do it, and you've got the guys who animate it to do it. Like, it was just perfect, and it just shocked me. Literally, my mouth kind of dropped on the floor because I was like, oh my god, you got Rick and Morty. This is like awesome. So that was a lot of fun. That's probably the best cameo in the entire movie for me, just because I was just completely shocked that they even showed up in the movie. And then the other aspect of the movie I really liked was the final basketball game. They have so much fun when the Looney Tunes finally get to be loony and just go apeshit on the basketball court. It's really fun to see their powers come, well, not powers, but their sort of loony abilities come into play. For example, you've got Roadrunner using his super speeds to kind of cause smoke to go around the goon squad so they can't see where the basketball is. That was a good use of Roadrunner. You had Wile E. Coyote using this multiplying machine, so when he puts a basketball in, the basketballs, you know, there's millions of basketballs coming out of this multiplying machine, and then he gets sucked into it, and he gets, you know, multiple versions of him fly out the screen and go into the hoop, and it was just very funny. And it was cool to see Lola Bunny play basketball because she is the best basketball player on the team. So it was just nice to see these moments of the Looney Tunes working together. Oh yeah, there was another moment where Tasmanian Devil, you know, he does that spinning thing, and he spins so fast that he physically rotates the basketball court. So as the Goon Squad member is about to shoot a basket, he flips the whole kind of stadium so that the villain scores in their own basket to give a point to the Looney Tunes. And I just thought it was very creative the way they decided to use all these elements. So that was really, really good fun. I really like the CGI on the Looney Tunes. I've mentioned that before. It's just overall just a really fun movie. Like, I could honestly talk about this movie for ages. I kind of wish I had someone, one of my mates, to come over and do this podcast with me, because I could talk about it for ages. It was just so fun. It was good dumb fun. If you like dumb fun movies, I highly recommend it. There's definitely some issues. SSSB Gonzalez is pointless in it. Oh, there was one thing I kind of didn't like, but I was like, I guess you kind of still need it. Basically, right at the end of the movie, they indicate that Bugs Bunny died, and I'm like, well, that's not going to happen. That's just kind of too dark for a kid's movie, and it's Bugs Bunny. They're not going to kill him off. He basically shows up in the real world with LeBron James. They don't explain how he gets out of the serververse and into the real world. They don't even explain how that works. He just literally appears there, talks to LeBron, and walks off kind of into the sunset with him, and then we get photos of the Looney Tunes hanging out with LeBron in the real world. And yeah, sure, we've seen the Looney Tunes in the real world in the first movie, but in this one, I was like, at least in the first one, there was kind of an explanation. Like, they explained that you could go back and forth between the two worlds. But in this one, it didn't explain if they could survive outside the serververse, and so like you kind of just have to accept at the end, oh, I mean, not only is he just randomly still alive because he's a cartoon and he can survive anything, but he somehow can function in this real life world. I thought if he was going to be in the real world, maybe he might be a CGI model, because I don't know how it works. In the movie, they kind of imply that depending on where you go, you get kind of different looks and abilities in those worlds. So I kind of just thought, well, if he's in the real world, shouldn't he look different? I mean, it was a very quick thought in my mind, but I was like, okay, this is kind of a really random way to have him appear in the real world whatsoever. He just literally shows up. But yeah, I don't really have anything bad to say about this movie, just apart from it could have been cut down by half an hour, and it's yeah, that's about it, really. I'd say the time is the biggest thing I'm not a fan of. I think it's just a little bit too long, but it's so wacky that I'd rewatch it happily anyway. Yeah, that's all I've got to say about the movie. Let me know what you guys thought. If you've seen Space Jam: A New Legacy, did you like it? Did you not like it? Do you still think the first one's better? Do you think this one might be better? Yeah, just let me know. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. But yeah, thanks for listening, guys, and I'll catch you on the next review.